The first stone hit the side of Hannah Aldridge's head while she sat reading beneath the ancient oak tree on the outskirts of Deadwood, South Dakota. And she knew without looking up that Samuel Turner and his gang of ranch hands had found her again. Blood trickled warm down her temple as she pressed her palm against the wound, her other hand clutching the leather-bound copy of Homer's Odyssey that had belonged to her late mother. The year was 1876, and in this rough mining town where fortunes were made and lost on the turn of a card, a 20-year-old woman who preferred books to social gatherings was considered an oddity at best and a target at worst. "Look at the school marm," Samuel called out, his voice thick with whiskey even though the sun had barely reached its zenith. "Too good for honest folk, always got her nose in them fancy books." Hannah stood slowly, keeping her dignity intact despite the blood on her face and the trembling in her hands. She had learned early that showing fear only encouraged men like Samuel. Her father had died in the mines 3 months ago, leaving her alone in a town that had little patience for women without male protection. The small cabin they had shared on the edge of town was hers now, along with the meager savings he had left and his collection of books, the only real treasure he had ever possessed. "Reading is not a crime," she said quietly, meeting Samuel's bloodshot eyes. "Perhaps you should try it sometime." The other men laughed, but it was the cruel laughter of mockery rather than genuine amusement. Samuel took a step closer, and Hannah could smell the sour stench of alcohol and unwashed skin. She stood her ground even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "Smart mouth on you," Samuel said. "Your pa spoiled you rotten, filling your head with nonsense instead of teaching you proper women's work. No wonder no man will have you." Before Hannah could respond, the sound of horse hooves on hard-packed earth cut through the tension. She turned to see a lone rider approaching, silhouetted against the harsh Dakota sun. The man sat tall in his saddle, his dark hat pulled low over his face, and even from a distance, there was something about him that commanded attention. Samuel and his friends noticed too, their bravado deflating slightly as the stranger drew closer. The rider stopped his horse a few yards away and dismounted with the easy grace of someone who had spent more of his life on horseback than on foot. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of creek water after spring rains. A worn leather vest covered a faded blue shirt, and a single revolver hung at his hip. He took in the scene with a quick, assessing glance, his gaze lingering on the blood running down Hannah's face. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was low and measured with the slight drawl of someone who had spent time in Texas. "Looks like you could use some assistance." "She don't need nothing from you, stranger," Samuel said, puffing up his chest. "This is a private matter." The stranger turned his attention to Samuel, and something in his expression made the drunk man take an involuntary step backward. "Didn't look private from where I was sitting. Looked like 4 grown men harassing a woman. Where I come from, we call that cowardice." Samuel's face flushed red, but before he could respond, the stranger continued. "I suggest you and your friends find somewhere else to be. Maybe sleep off whatever you've been drinking." For a moment, Hannah thought Samuel might actually be foolish enough to draw his gun, but whatever he saw in the stranger's eyes convinced him otherwise. With a final glare at Hannah, Samuel jerked his head at his companions, and they retreated toward town, their pride wounded but their bodies intact. Hannah let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. The stranger turned back to her, his expression softening with concern. "That cut needs tending. Is there a doctor in town?" "There is, but I can manage it myself," Hannah said, suddenly aware of how she must look, dusty and bloodied with her dark hair coming loose from its pins. Thank you for your intervention. Those men have been making my life difficult since my father passed. My condolences for your loss, the stranger said. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a clean handkerchief, offering it to her. At least let me help you get cleaned up. I'm Quentin Ellis, just arrived in town today. I'll be working at the Miller Ranch west of here. Hannah accepted the handkerchief and pressed it to her temple. Hannah Aldridge, I live in the cabin just over that ridge, and thank you, Mr. Ellis. Your timing was fortunate. Quentin, please, he said. His eyes fell on the book she still clutched in her other hand, and something flickered across his face. Interest, she thought, or perhaps recognition. The Odyssey. That's a fine choice. Your father taught you to read the classics. Hannah stared at him in surprise. In her experience, most cowboys could barely scratch out their own names, let alone recognize ancient Greek literature. You know Homer. Quentin's mouth quirked in what might have been the start of a smile. My mother was a schoolteacher back in Austin. She made sure I could read before she'd let me learn to rope cattle, said a man's mind needed exercise just as much as his body. He paused, and something vulnerable crossed his face. She passed when I was 17. Books remind me of her. The simple honesty in his words touched something deep in Hannah's chest. My father felt the same way. He worked in the mines, but every evening he would read to me. After my mother died giving birth to my stillborn brother, books became our way of staying close to her memory. They stood in the shade of the oak tree, two strangers connected by shared loss and a love of literature that seemed out of place in this rough frontier town. Quentin's horse, a handsome sorrel gelding, stamped its feet and tossed its head, impatient with standing still. I should let you get settled at the ranch, Hannah said, though she found herself reluctant to end this unexpected conversation. Thank you again for your help. Before I go, Quentin said, and there was a hesitation in his voice that had not been there when he faced down Samuel and his friends. I'm going to be honest with you, Miss Aldridge. I never learned to read as well as I should have. My mother tried, and I can manage signs and simple things, but the bigger words, the way they string together in books like that, he nodded toward the Homer. I struggle with them. But I've always wanted to read that story about Odysseus and his journey home. He took a breath, and Hannah could see the courage it took for him to continue. Would you consider reading to me sometime? I could pay you or help with work around your cabin, whatever seems fair. I know it's an unusual request. Hannah felt warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she had not experienced since her father's death. Here was a man who was not threatened by her education, who did not mock her for loving books. Instead, he valued what she could offer and was humble enough to ask for help. I would be happy to read to you, Quentin, she said softly. And I would not want payment. It would be nice to share these stories with someone who appreciates them. The smile that lit up Quentin's face transformed him from handsome to something approaching beautiful. That's mighty kind of you. I'm supposed to start work tomorrow, but I get Sundays off. Would this Sunday be too soon? Sunday would be perfect, Hannah said. Come to my cabin around sunset. We'll have good light for reading, and it's cooler then. They made their arrangements, and Quentin mounted his horse with a final tip of his hat. Hannah watched him ride toward the Miller Ranch, her heart beating faster than it had in months. She touched the handkerchief to her temple again and found the bleeding had mostly stopped. The cut would leave a small scar, she suspected, but she found she did not mind. It would remind her of this moment, of the day a cowboy had defended her, and then asked her to share the things she loved most in the world. The walk back to her cabin took only 10 minutes, and Hannah spent the time thinking about what she would read to Quentin on Sunday. The Odyssey was long, perhaps too ambitious for a first session. She had other books, including some of her father's favorites. Perhaps something by Dickens, or maybe some American poetry. Inside the small cabin, Hannah cleaned her wound properly and changed into a fresh dress. The place was sparse but clean, with her father's books lining one wall on shelves he had built himself. A single bedroom, a main room with a fireplace and small kitchen area, and a root cellar beneath the floorboards comprised her entire home. It was not much, but it was hers, and she had been determined to keep it despite the pressure from several townspeople who thought a young woman living alone was improper. The next few days passed slowly. Hannah did her washing, tended the small garden behind the cabin, and made the weekly trip into town for supplies. She kept her head down and avoided Samuel Turner and his friends, though she caught them watching her from outside the saloon. The bruise on her temple had darkened to purple before starting to fade to yellow, and more than one person asked about it. She told them she had walked into a tree branch, not wanting to cause more trouble. On Saturday evening, as she was deciding which book to start with on the following day, someone knocked on her door. Hannah opened it cautiously to find a woman she recognized from church, Mrs. Dorothy Chen, one of the few Chinese families who had stayed in Deadwood after the railroad work ended. She was a kind woman in her 40s who ran a successful laundry business with her husband. "Hannah, dear," Mrs. Chen said, holding a covered basket. "I heard about what happened with those awful men. I brought you some dumplings, and I wanted to make sure you were all right." Touched by the gesture, Hannah invited her in. Over tea and the delicious dumplings, Mrs. Chen revealed that she had also heard about Quentin's intervention. In a small town, news traveled fast. "Be careful with that one," Mrs. Chen said, though her tone was gentle rather than warning. "The Miller Ranch has a rough reputation. Most of the hands who work there are running from something. Not bad men necessarily, but troubled ones." "Quentin seems different," Hannah said softly. Mrs. Chen patted her hand. "Maybe he is. I hope so. You deserve some happiness, child. Your father was a good man, and he raised you well. Do not let the small minds in this town make you feel ashamed of who you are." After Mrs. Chen left, Hannah thought about her words. She knew the older woman was right to be cautious, but something in her gut told her that Quentin Ellis was trustworthy. Still, she made sure her father's rifle was loaded and within easy reach. Trusting and foolish were two different things. Sunday arrived with a brilliant blue sky and temperatures that promised to soar during the day but would cool pleasantly by evening. Hannah spent the day cleaning the cabin until it shone, telling herself she was just being a good host and trying to ignore the nervous flutter in her stomach. She chose a book of American poetry, including works by Longfellow and Whitman, figuring shorter pieces would be easier to navigate than a long novel. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Hannah heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. She smoothed her dress, a simple calico in deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes, and opened the door just as Quentin dismounted. He had cleaned up since their first meeting, his face freshly shaved and his hair still damp from washing. He wore clean clothes and carried a bundle wrapped in cloth under one arm. When he saw her, his face broke into that transformative smile. "Good evening, Hannah," he said. "I hope I am not too early." "Your timing is perfect," she assured him. "Come in, please." Quentin entered the cabin, removing his hat and looking around with evident interest. His gaze landed on the wall of books and he let out a low whistle. "That's quite a collection." "Your father must have been collecting for years." "Since before I was born," Hannah said. "He always said that books were the only wealth that mattered, the only treasure that could not be stolen or lost in a bad investment." "Wise man," Quentin said. He held out the bundle he had been carrying. "I brought you something. It is not much, but I thought you might enjoy it." Hannah unwrapped the cloth to find a beautiful piece of honeycomb, still in its wax frame, fresh and golden. "Quentin, this is wonderful. Where did you find it?" "There is a wild hive near the ranch. The foreman knows how to harvest it without getting stung to death. I mentioned I was visiting a friend and he gave me this to bring as a gift." Quentin shifted his weight, suddenly looking uncertain. "I hope that is all right, the gift and me calling us friends." "It is more than all right," Hannah said warmly. "Thank you. This is a real treat. Please sit down. Would you like some coffee before we start reading?" They settled into a comfortable routine. Hannah made coffee while Quentin sat at her small table, asking questions about the various books on her shelves. His interest was genuine, she could tell, not feigned to impress her. He admitted that he had spent most of his life working cattle, drifting from ranch to ranch across Texas and up into the Dakota territory. The Miller Ranch was supposed to be a more permanent position, or at least that was his hope. As the light outside turned from gold to purple, Hannah lit the oil lamps and brought out the poetry book. They moved to the 2 chairs near the fireplace, though no fire was needed in the summer evening. Hannah opened to a poem by Longfellow, one of her favorites. "This is called The Day is Done," she said. "It is about finding peace and comfort in poetry at the end of a long day." She began to read, her voice soft but clear in the quiet cabin. Quentin leaned forward in his chair, his eyes on her face rather than the book, listening with an intensity that made her acutely aware of every word she spoke. When she finished the poem, he sat back with a long exhale. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. "The way you read it, I could see it all. The evening descending, the need for rest." "Read another." Hannah did, and then another. They worked through several poems, and Hannah found herself explaining references and discussing meanings. Quentin was not educated in the formal sense, but he was intelligent and thoughtful. He made connections she had not considered and asked questions that deepened her own understanding. "How come folks in town give you such grief about reading?" Quentin asked during a pause. "Seems to me it is something to be admired, not mocked." Hannah set the book down in her lap. "I think it frightens some people. A woman who reads is a woman who thinks for herself, who might question the way things are. And in a place like this, where life is hard and uncertain, people cling to familiar patterns. I disrupt those patterns." "Their loss," Quentin said firmly. "You're the most interesting person I have met since coming to Deadwood." The compliment warmed Hannah more than it probably should have. They continued reading until full darkness had fallen and Quentin reluctantly said he needed to get back to the ranch. The hands were expected to be in the bunkhouse by a certain hour, and he did not want to make a bad impression in his first week. "Can I come back next Sunday?" he asked as he stood to leave. "This has been the best evening I have had in longer than I can remember." "I would like that very much," Hannah said. Same time," Quentin confirmed. He hesitated at the door, then turned back. "Hannah, I want you to know that I meant what I said about you being interesting. You are also kind and brave, and I am grateful you are willing to share this with me." Before she could respond, he had settled his hat on his head and slipped out into the night. Hannah stood at the door and watched him ride away, her heart full in a way it had not been since her father's death. The week that followed was brighter somehow. Hannah went about her usual routines, but found herself looking forward to Sunday with an anticipation that made even mundane tasks seem lighter. She saw Quentin once in town when she went for supplies. He was with some of the other ranch hands, loading lumber into a wagon, but he caught her eye and tipped his hat with a smile that she felt down to her toes. Samuel Turner saw the exchange and his expression darkened, but he made no move to approach her. Hannah was grateful for that small mercy. Sunday came again, and this time Quentin brought wildflowers he had picked on the ride over. "They are not as nice as what you could buy from the flower seller in town," he admitted, "but I thought they were pretty." Hannah arranged them in a jar with water and set them on the table where she could see them. They read more poetry that evening, and some of Washington Irving's short stories. Quentin was particularly taken with Rip Van Winkle, laughing at the idea of sleeping through 20 years of change. "Sometimes I feel like that is what happened to me," he said thoughtfully. "Like I was sleeping through my life, just going through the motions until I came here and met you. Now I feel awake." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Hannah met his eyes across the lamplight and saw vulnerability there, and hope, and something else she was afraid to name. "I know what you mean," she said softly. "I have been so lonely since Papa died. Everyone in town sees me as a problem to be solved or an oddity to be mocked." "You see me as a person. You are quite a person," Quentin said. His voice had gone rough and he cleared his throat. "I should probably tell you that I am not just a drifting cowboy looking for temporary work. I have been saving my wages for years. I want to buy my own piece of land someday, raise horses. I am good with horses, always have been. It is a dream I have had since I was a boy." "That sounds wonderful," Hannah said. "Where would you want to settle?" "I have been thinking right here in the Dakota Territory," Quentin admitted. "The land is hard, but it is beautiful and there is room to grow. And there are other reasons to stay now, too." He did not elaborate, but Hannah understood his meaning. The feeling blooming in her chest was both terrifying and exhilarating. She had not expected this when Quentin Ellis rode into her life, but she found she did not want to fight it. Their Sunday evening readings became a fixed point in both their weeks. Through July and into August, they worked their way through her father's collection. They read Dickens and Austen, poetry and philosophy, adventure stories and romances. With each passing week, Hannah saw Quentin's confidence grow. He started recognizing words on the page, following along as she read. His natural intelligence combined with genuine motivation made him a quick learner. But more than that, they talked. Between readings, they shared their lives with each other. Quentin told her about his childhood in Texas, his mother's death, and his father's subsequent descent into drink. He had left home at 17 to escape the violence and had been working ranches ever since. He spoke of the beauty of the open range, the satisfaction of good, honest work, and the loneliness of never having a real home. Hannah told him about growing up in mining camps, watching her father search for a fortune that never came. She spoke of her mother, who she barely remembered but who lived on in her father's stories and in the books she had loved. She confessed her fears about the future, about being alone, about losing the cabin and having nowhere to go. "You will not lose your home," Quentin said fiercely when she voiced this worry. "Even if I have to work extra jobs to help you keep it. You belong here, Hannah. This is your place." The summer heat peaked in early August, making the Dakota plains shimmer with mirages. The work at the Miller Ranch was hard, and Quentin would arrive at Hannah's cabin each Sunday with new bruises and rope burns on his hands. She began keeping a tin of salve ready to tend to the worst of his injuries, and he would sit patiently while she cleaned and bandaged his calloused hands. "You do not have to do this," he said one evening as she wrapped a particularly nasty rope burn. "I am used to tending my own hurts." "I know I do not have to," Hannah said, keeping her eyes on her work to hide the emotion she feared would show in them. "I want to. Is that all right?" Quentin's free hand came up to gently tilt her chin until she was looking at him. "It is more than all right. Hannah, I need to tell you something." Her heart began to pound. "What is it?" "I am falling in love with you," he said simply. "I think I have been since the moment I saw you standing up to those men, bloody but unbowed, with your book clutched in your hand like a weapon. You are the strongest, smartest, most beautiful woman I have ever known, and I cannot imagine my life without these evenings together." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. "Quentin, I feel the same way, but I am scared. What if this does not work? What if you decide you want to move on, or the ranch lets you go, or something happens?" "Life is uncertain," Quentin acknowledged, "but I can promise you this, I am not going anywhere. I have spent 10 years drifting, never putting down roots because I was waiting for something, though I did not know what. Now I know. I was waiting for you." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. Hannah did not want to. When his lips met hers, gentle and questioning, she felt like she had come home after a long journey. The kiss deepened, and she let herself get lost in the wonder of being wanted, of being loved for exactly who she was. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Quentin rested his forehead against hers. "I want to court you properly," he said. "With your permission, I would like to come calling, let folks know that you are spoken for." "Some people will not like that," Hannah warned. "Samuel and his friends already hate me. This will make it worse." "Let them hate," Quentin said. "They are cowards and bullies. Besides, you are not the only one who can read now. I have been practicing." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. With obvious pride, he read aloud, slowly but surely. "I, Quentin Ellis, do formally request permission to court Miss Hannah Aldridge, the smartest and prettiest woman in all of South Dakota." Hannah laughed through her tears. "You wrote that yourself?" "With some help from the foreman's wife on the spelling," Quentin admitted. "But the words are mine. What do you say, Hannah? Will you have me?" "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will." They kissed again, and then settled back into their reading, though neither could focus properly on the words. Everything had changed, and yet the core of what brought them together remained the same. A shared love of stories and the comfort of not being alone. The next Sunday, Quentin arrived driving a small wagon instead of riding his horse. Hannah came out to meet him, curious about the change. He helped her up onto the seat beside him, his hand lingering on hers. "I thought we might go for a ride," he said. "There is something I want to show you." They drove west from her cabin, following rough tracks across the prairie. Quentin pointed out landmarks, telling her about the work he did on the ranch. He was clearly good at his job. She could tell from the way he spoke about the cattle and horses with knowledge and affection. After about 30 minutes, they crested a small rise and Quentin pulled the wagon to a stop. "There," he said, pointing to a valley below them. A creek ran through it, lined with cottonwood trees. The grass grew thick and green near the water, and the whole area was sheltered by the surrounding hills. "What do you think?" "It is beautiful," Hannah said honestly. "Whose land is this?" "Right now it belongs to the government," Quentin said, "but it is open for homesteading. I have been talking to the land office in town. If I file a claim and prove it up, work the land for 5 years, it could be mine." Hannah's breath caught. "You want a homestead here?" "I want to build a life here," Quentin corrected. He turned to face her fully. "Hannah, I know we have only known each other for 2 months. I know it is fast. But I am 30 years old and I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I want to marry you, build a house right there by that creek, raise horses and maybe a family if you want that too." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a simple gold ring. "This was my mother's. It is the only thing of hers I have. I know I do not have much to offer you right now beyond hard work and promises, but I swear to you, Hannah, I will spend every day of my life making you happy. Will you marry me?" Hannah looked at the ring, then at Quentin's face, open and hopeful and scared all at once. She thought about her lonely cabin, about the townspeople who mocked her, about the uncertain future she faced alone. Then she thought about these past 2 months, about Sunday evenings filled with stories and laughter, about calloused hands holding hers with infinite gentleness, about being seen and valued for who she was. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Quentin let out a whoop of joy that startled a flock of birds from the nearby trees. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit as though it had been made for her. Then he kissed her with a passion that made her toes curl in her boots and her heart sing in her chest. They spent the rest of the afternoon by the creek, planning their future. Quentin would file the homestead claim immediately. He had enough saved to buy lumber for a small house and some basic supplies. If they lived frugally, they could make it work. Hannah's cabin could be sold or rented for additional income, though the thought of parting with her father's books caused her physical pain. "Bring them with you," Quentin said when she voiced this worry. "Every single one. We will build shelves in our new house, make a whole library. Our children will grow up surrounded by books, just like you did." The word children sent a thrill through Hannah. She had not let herself think that far ahead, but now, with Quentin's arm around her and their future spread out before them like the Dakota prairie, she could envision it. Sons and daughters with Quentin's green eyes and her dark hair, learning to read and ride, growing up in a home filled with love and stories. They decided to marry quickly, not wanting to wait. In frontier towns like Deadwood, long engagements were rare. People married fast and built their lives together in real time. They set the date for 3 weeks away, on the first Sunday in September, giving them enough time to make basic arrangements but not so long that they had to endure endless waiting. When word spread through town that Hannah Aldridge was engaged to the new hand from the Miller Ranch, reactions were mixed. Mrs. Chen and a few other kind souls offered congratulations and help with the wedding preparations. But Samuel Turner and his friends made their displeasure known, spreading rumors that Quentin was after Hannah's property or that she had bewitched him with her strange ways. Quentin handled the gossip with quiet dignity, but Hannah could see it bothered him more than he let on. One evening she found him behind the stable where he boarded his horse, his knuckles bloody and his face dark with anger. "What happened?" she asked, reaching for his hands. "Samuel called you a name I will not repeat," Quentin said flatly. "I could not let that stand. Did you hit him?" "I did." Quentin looked at her, expecting censure, but Hannah just sighed. "Good," she said. "Though I hate that you got hurt. Come on, let me clean those cuts." They sat on a bench outside the stable while Hannah tended to his injuries. "I do not care what they say about me," she told him. "I stopped caring what this town thinks a long time ago, but I care about you and I do not want you getting into fights on my account." "He disrespected you," Quentin said. "I could not just walk away." "I know," Hannah said softly, "and I love that you want to defend me. But Quentin, we are going to face challenges building our homestead. We need to save our energy for that, not waste it on people who do not matter." Quentin pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "You are right. You are always right. How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky," Hannah corrected. "Now let's go home. I want to read to you." They had settled into reading Great Expectations by Dickens, and both were engrossed in Pip's story. But that evening, as they sat in Hannah's cabin with the book between them, Quentin stopped her mid-sentence. "Teach me," he said. "I mean really teach me. I can follow along now, recognize some words, but I want to be able to read on my own. I want to be able to read to our children someday." Hannah's heart swelled. "All right, we will work on it together, but Quentin, you have already come so far. You should be proud of yourself." "I am proud," he said, "but I want to be better. For you, for our future family, for myself. Will you help me?" "Always," Hannah promised. They spent their evenings differently after that. Hannah would read a passage, then have Quentin read it back, helping him with difficult words and explaining grammar. He was a dedicated student, practicing whenever he had spare time. The foreman's wife, a kind woman named Margaret, reported seeing him reading by lamplight in the bunkhouse long after the other hands had gone to sleep. The weeks before the wedding flew by. Quentin filed his homestead claim and began clearing the land near the creek. Several of the ranch hands, impressed by his work ethic and his devotion to Hannah, volunteered to help him build a basic cabin. It would not be fancy, just 4 walls, a roof, a fireplace, and a loft for sleeping, but it would be theirs. Hannah spent her time packing up her father's cabin and preparing for the move. Mrs. Chen helped her sew a simple wedding dress from cream-colored cotton. It was not elaborate, but when Hannah looked at herself in the small mirror, she felt beautiful. The night before the wedding, Hannah sat alone in her cabin for the last time. She had sold most of the furniture, keeping only a few special pieces that had belonged to her father. The books were already packed carefully in crates, ready to be transported to the new house. She ran her hand over the empty shelves, remembering all the evenings she had spent here with her father and now with Quentin. "I hope you would approve, Papa," she said softly to the empty room. "I think you would have liked him. He is honest and hardworking, and he loves your books almost as much as you did." A gentle wind blew through the open window, rustling the curtains, and Hannah chose to take it as a sign of blessing. The wedding took place at the small church in Deadwood, with Reverend Thomas officiating. Hannah wore her cream dress and carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Quentin had picked that morning. He stood at the altar in new clothes bought specially for the occasion, his hair neatly combed, his eyes never leaving her face as she walked down the aisle. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When Quentin said his vows, his voice rang out clear and strong, no hesitation or doubt. "I, Quentin Ellis, take you, Hannah Aldridge, to be my wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and read with you every day for the rest of our lives." The last part was not traditional, but it made Hannah laugh through her tears. She spoke her own vows with equal conviction, and when Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Quentin kissed her with a tenderness that made her forget anyone else was in the room. The small gathering of well-wishers, mostly Mrs. Chen and her family, the ranch hands who had helped build their cabin, and a few other townspeople who had shown Hannah kindness over the years, celebrated with them afterward. There was cake and coffee, and someone had brought a fiddle for music. Quentin danced with his bride in the churchyard as the sun set, both of them laughing and giddy with joy. As darkness fell, they rode together in the wagon out to their new homestead. Quentin had been out earlier to light lamps in the cabin, and it glowed warmly as they approached. He helped Hannah down from the wagon and then, before she could protest, swept her up into his arms. "Tradition," he said with a grin. "Got to carry you over the threshold." The cabin was small but cozy. Someone, probably Margaret, had left wildflowers on the table and made up the bed in the loft with fresh linens. Quentin set Hannah down gently and they stood together, looking at their new home. "It is not much yet," Quentin said, "but we will make it into something wonderful, I promise." "It is already wonderful," Hannah said, "because you are here with me." They spent their wedding night wrapped in each other's arms, discovering the joy and intimacy of marriage. Quentin was gentle and patient, making sure Hannah felt safe and loved. Afterward, as they lay together in the darkness, Hannah felt a peace she had never known before. She had found her place in the world, and it was right here. The next morning, Quentin woke early to do his chores at the ranch, but he promised to be back by evening. "Just 1 more month," he said, kissing Hannah goodbye. "Then my obligation to Miller is fulfilled and I can work our land full-time." Hannah spent the day organizing their cabin, unpacking the precious books and arranging them on the shelves Quentin had built. She set up a small kitchen area and began planning a garden for the following spring. It was hard work, but satisfying in a way that her old life had never been true to his word. Quentin returned as the sun was setting. They ate a simple dinner that Hannah had prepared, and then he pulled out a book. "I want to try," he said. "I have been practicing." He opened to the first chapter of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and began to read aloud. His pace was slow and he stumbled over some of the longer words, but he pushed through with determination. Hannah sat beside him, her heart full of pride and love, helping when he got stuck but mostly just listening. "That was wonderful," she said when he finished the chapter. "Quentin, you have come so far." "I had a good teacher," he said, pulling her close. "The best teacher in the world." They fell into a rhythm over the following weeks. Quentin worked at the ranch during the day while Hannah tended their homestead. He came home each evening exhausted but happy, and they would spend an hour reading together before bed. Sometimes Quentin read, sometimes Hannah. Often they would switch back and forth. The stories became a thread that wove their days together, a constant in the midst of hard physical labor and uncertainty. September gave way to October, and Quentin's obligation to the Miller Ranch ended. He collected his final wages and came home for good. Now, the real work of homesteading began. They planted winter wheat and built a shelter for the horses Quentin planned to breed and train. They hauled rocks from the creek to build a better foundation for the cabin and chinked the walls against the coming cold. The work was back-breaking, and there were days when Hannah wondered if they had been foolish to think they could make it. But Quentin never wavered in his commitment, and his optimism proved infectious. Slowly, the homestead took shape. They acquired 2 mares in foal, the beginning of Quentin's horse breeding operation. Hannah started teaching reading lessons to a few of the ranch children whose parents were willing to pay a small fee, bringing in extra income. Winter arrived hard and early that year, blanketing the prairie in snow by mid-November. Quentin and Hannah were as prepared as they could be, with a full root cellar and enough firewood to last through the cold months. The enforced closeness of winter brought its own joys. They would spend long evenings by the fire, reading aloud or talking about their plans for spring. Quentin continued to improve his reading, and by Christmas, he could make it through several pages without help. On Christmas Eve, Hannah gave Quentin a gift she had been working on in secret, a journal bound in leather that she had stitched herself. "For you to write down your thoughts," she explained. "You can read well now. Writing is the next step." Quentin was moved nearly to tears. His gift to her was simpler but no less meaningful. A rocking chair he had carved and assembled during the rare moments she was not around. "For when we have children," he said, "you can rock them and read to them, just like your father did for you." As winter slowly released its grip and spring approached, Hannah realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another month to be sure, and when the signs continued, she shared the news with Quentin. They were going to have a baby. Quentin's reaction was everything Hannah could have hoped for. He spun her around the cabin, laughing and whooping, before setting her down gently as though she might break. "We are going to be parents," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "Hannah, we are going to have a child." The pregnancy was not easy. Hannah struggled with sickness in the early months and exhaustion throughout. Quentin took on as much of the work as he could, refusing to let her do anything too strenuous. Mrs. Chen visited regularly, bringing remedies for nausea and advice for the expectant mother. As summer arrived and Hannah's belly swelled, Quentin began reading to the baby every night. He would press his ear to her stomach, feeling for kicks, and then open whatever book they were working through and read aloud. Hannah would watch him, her heart so full of love she thought it might burst. "You are going to be an amazing father," she told him one evening. "I am going to try," Quentin said seriously. "I want to be nothing like my own father. This child will grow up knowing they are loved, knowing that learning and kindness matter more than being tough or strong." In late August, as the prairie grasses turned gold and the nights grew cooler, Hannah went into labor. Mrs. Chen and Margaret from the ranch came to help, sending Quentin outside to pace nervously while they attended to Hannah. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. But finally, as the sun rose over the Dakota prairie, Hannah gave birth to a healthy baby boy. When Mrs. Chen placed the crying infant in her arms, Hannah felt a love so fierce it was almost frightening. The baby had Quentin's eyes, that same clear green, and a cap of dark hair that matched Hannah's. Quentin came in moments later, his face pale with worry until he saw Hannah and the baby both alive and well. Then he knelt beside the bed, tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Quentin whispered. "Hannah, he is perfect." They named him Thomas after Hannah's father. Little Thomas was a good baby, curious and alert. Quentin proved to be as devoted a father as Hannah had known he would be. He would wake in the night to walk with the baby when he cried, singing soft songs in his Texas drawl. And true to his promise, he read to Thomas every single night, even though the infant was too young to understand the words. "He is listening to your voice," Hannah said. Learning the rhythm of language. My father used to say that is how children learn to love stories, by hearing them read aloud before they even know what the words mean. The homestead continued to grow. Quentin's horses gained a reputation for being well-trained and gentle, and he began to make good money selling them. Hannah's reading lessons expanded as more families heard about her teaching skills. She had to turn students away. There were simply too many for her to handle while caring for an infant. When Thomas was 6 months old, Quentin surprised Hannah with an announcement. "I filed the paperwork for our land patent. In 4.5 more years, if we keep working the claim, this will legally be ours. No one can take it from us." Hannah looked around their cabin, at the shelves full of books, at her husband holding their son, at the life they had built together from nothing but love and determination. "We are going to make it," she said with certainty. "We are really going to make it." The years that followed were not always easy. There were droughts that tested their resources and harsh winters that pushed them to their limits. Thomas was joined by a sister, Mary, when he was 3, and then another brother, Joseph, 2 years after that. The cabin had to be expanded to accommodate their growing family, and there was always more work than hours in the day. But through it all, they had their books and each other. Every night, without fail, Quentin and Hannah would gather their children and read together. As the kids grew older, they began to read aloud too, stumbling over words just as Quentin had in the beginning. He was patient with them, encouraging their efforts, never mocking or dismissing their struggles. Thomas proved to have his mother's love of literature and his father's practical nature. Mary was a dreamer who preferred fairy tales and adventures. Joseph, the baby, loved any book as long as he could sit on his father's lap while it was being read. On their 5th anniversary, Quentin gave Hannah another gift, a printing of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass that he had ordered from a bookseller in Chicago. "I read the whole thing myself before I gave it to you," he said proudly. "Took me 3 months, but I did it. I wanted to make sure it was something you would like." Hannah held the book to her chest, tears in her eyes. "I love it, but Quentin, you are the greatest gift. You and our children and this life we have built. I never imagined I could be this happy." "I never imagined happiness at all before I met you," Quentin admitted. "You saved me, Hannah. You gave me a reason to stop drifting and build something real." "We saved each other," Hannah corrected. She thought back to that day under the oak tree, when a bleeding and mocked young woman had met a cowboy who asked her to read to him. It seemed like another lifetime, though it had only been 5 years. The town of Deadwood had changed too. Samuel Turner had drunk himself to death the previous winter, and many of the rougher elements had moved on as the initial gold rush faded. New families arrived, more respectable settlers looking to build legitimate businesses and homes. Hannah was no longer an oddity but a respected member of the community, known for her teaching and her beautiful family. When the 5 years required for the homestead were complete, Quentin and Hannah took their children into town to file for their land patent. It was official now. They owned their piece of the Dakota territory outright. That night, they celebrated by reading the entire first book of the Odyssey, taking turns so everyone could participate. It was the book that had brought them together, and it felt right to mark this milestone with Odysseus's journey home. "We are home now," Quentin said when they finished. "Really and truly home." The years continued to pass. The children grew tall and strong, educated in both books and the practical skills needed for frontier life. Thomas announced at age 16 that he wanted to be a teacher like his mother. Mary declared she would be a writer, crafting her own stories to add to the family library. Joseph was content to work the horses with his father, showing the same natural ability Quentin had. Quentin and Hannah grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They added more rooms to the house, more horses to the stable, more books to the shelves. The small homestead became a prosperous ranch, proof that hard work and dedication could overcome any obstacle. On their 20th anniversary, their children threw them a party. Friends and neighbors from miles around attended, filling the house and spilling out into the yard. There were toasts and stories, food and dancing, and at the end of the evening, Thomas stood up to speak. "My parents taught us many things," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "They taught us to work hard, to be kind, to value education and family. But most importantly, they taught us that love is a choice you make every single day. They chose each other when the whole town said it would not work. They built this ranch and this family from nothing but determination and devotion. And every single night of my life, without exception, they have read to us stories of adventure and heroism, of love and loss, of people overcoming impossible odds. Looking around at what they have created, I realized they were not just reading us those stories. They were living them." Hannah leaned against Quentin, tears streaming down her face. He wrapped his arm around her, and she felt the same strength and security she had felt that very first evening when he asked her to read to him. "No regrets," Quentin whispered in her ear. "Not a single one," Hannah whispered back. "You? Only that I did not meet you sooner," he said. "But then again, we probably needed to become who we were before we could recognize what we had found in each other." As the party wound down and their guests departed, Quentin and Hannah walked hand in hand to the creek where he had first proposed. The cottonwoods had grown tall over the years, their leaves rustling in the evening breeze. They sat on a bench Quentin had built years ago, watching the water flow past. "Read to me," Quentin asked, pulling a small book from his pocket. It was a collection of love sonnets worn from use. Hannah took the book and opened to a favorite passage. But before she could begin, Quentin stopped her. "Actually, let me," he said. "I have been practicing." He took the book back and began to read, his voice confident and smooth. The words flowed beautifully, and Hannah realized with a start that he was not just reading anymore. He was truly literate, able to tackle any book he chose with skill and comprehension. When he finished, she kissed him softly. "I am so proud of you. You have worked so hard." "We worked hard," Quentin corrected. "Everything we have, we built together." "I would not have any of this without you, Hannah. Not the land, not the children, not the ability to read and write and share these stories. You gave me everything. You gave me everything too, Hannah said. A home, a family, a purpose. Those men who mocked me for reading, they could not imagine that my love of books would lead me to you. They could not see that being different was not a weakness but a strength. I am glad I never tried to change who I was. I am glad too, Quentin said fervently. Because who you are is exactly who I needed. They sat together as darkness fell, talking about their children's futures and their own plans for the years ahead. There were grandchildren to look forward to, more books to read, more stories to share. The ranch was thriving, and there was talk of Thomas opening a school in the area. Mary had already submitted her first story to a magazine in New York. Joseph was courting a girl from a neighboring ranch, and wedding bells seemed likely. As they finally stood to return to the house, Hannah looked back at the life they had created. The sturdy home with its walls lined with books, the corrals full of beautiful horses, the land they had claimed and worked and loved. And at the center of it all, the man who had asked a lonely, mocked woman to read to him and in doing so had changed both their lives forever. "Thank you," Hannah said softly. "For what?" Quentin asked. "For seeing me. For valuing what everyone else dismissed. For loving me exactly as I am." "Thank you for teaching me," Quentin replied. "For sharing your greatest treasures with me. For building this life by my side." They walked back to the house together, their hands intertwined, their hearts full. Through the windows, they could see their children still cleaning up from the party, laughing and talking. This was their legacy. A family built on love and stories, on hard work and dedication, on the simple act of reading together every night. As they climbed the steps to their porch, Quentin pulled Hannah close for one more kiss. "Same time tomorrow," he asked, their old tradition. "Same time tomorrow," Hannah confirmed. "And every day after that for the rest of our lives," and they kept that promise. Through the decades that followed, through the arrival of grandchildren, and then great-grandchildren, through good years and hard years, Quentin and Hannah Ellis read together every single night. Their library grew to be the finest private collection in the Dakota Territory, and their home became a gathering place for anyone who loved books and stories. When they were old and gray, sitting on their porch watching the sun set over the prairie they had claimed so many years ago, they would still reach for a book. Their children and grandchildren would gather around, 3 generations linked by literature and love. And as Quentin read aloud, his voice still strong despite his years, Hannah would close her eyes and remember that day under the oak tree when a cowboy had asked a mocked young woman to read to him. It had been the beginning of everything, their love, their family, their home. And it all started with books, with stories, with the simple, profound act of sharing words on a page. They had proven that education was not something to mock but something to treasure, that different was not wrong but beautiful, that love could grow from the unlikeliest of beginnings. The Ellis Ranch became legendary in South Dakota, not for its size or wealth, though it had both, but for the love that had built it. People would travel from distant towns to hear the story of Quentin and Hannah, the cowboy and the book-loving woman who had defied expectations and created something extraordinary. And every telling of their story ended the same way, with 2 people sitting together, a book open between them, reading aloud as the sun set on another perfect day. They had found in each other what everyone searches for: acceptance, partnership, and a love that grew stronger with each passing year. Thomas became a renowned educator, establishing schools throughout the territory and always teaching his students that knowledge was power and reading was freedom. Mary published her first novel at age 25, dedicating it to her parents who had shown her the magic of stories. Joseph ran the ranch with the same dedication his father had shown, and his horses were sought after across the West. The grandchildren came, 11 in total, and then the great-grandchildren. The Ellis family tree grew deep roots in South Dakota soil, and every branch was strengthened by the tradition Quentin and Hannah had established, reading together, sharing stories, valuing education and love above all else. When Quentin was 72 and Hannah 67, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. The entire town turned out for the party, which lasted 3 days. Their children and grandchildren organized readings from favorite books, and person after person stood to testify about how the Ellis family had changed their lives. "My mother could not read," one woman said, tears in her eyes. "But Mrs. Ellis taught me, and then I taught my mother. That gift, that kindness, it changed everything for our family. Mr. Ellis taught me it was not shameful to struggle with reading," a young man added. "He showed me that with patience and practice, anyone could learn. Now I am teaching my own children, passing on what he gave to me." The testimonials went on for hours, and Quentin and Hannah sat hand in hand, overwhelmed by the impact their simple love of reading had created. They had not set out to change the world, only to share what they loved with each other and their children. But in doing so, they had created ripples that spread far beyond their small homestead. That night, after all the guests had gone home and their children had retired to their own houses, Quentin and Hannah sat in their favorite spot by the creek. Quentin pulled out a book, the same copy of Homer's Odyssey that Hannah had been reading the day they met. The pages were yellowed and worn, but the words were still clear. "Where did we leave off?" Quentin asked with a smile. "Book 9, Hannah said. "Odysseus is telling his story to the Phaeacians." "Appropriate," Quentin said. "A man telling the story of his journey home. Let me read it." And he did, his voice strong and sure, bringing the ancient words to life. Hannah listened with the same rapt attention she had given every reading over their 50 years together. When he finished the book, they sat in comfortable silence, the creek burbling softly beside them. "We have had a good life," Hannah said finally. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." "The best life," Quentin agreed. "And it is not over yet. We have more books to read, more grandchildren to teach, more years to love each other." They had 5 more years together, years filled with the same joy and purpose that had characterized their entire marriage. And when Hannah fell ill in the winter of 1926, Quentin never left her side. He read to her constantly, all her favorite stories, his voice a comfort in the darkness of illness. On a cold February night, with Quentin holding her hand and reading from Pride and Prejudice, Hannah Aldridge Ellis passed peacefully from this world. She was 72 years old and had lived to see her family flourish, her beloved books shared with generations, and her love story become legend. Quentin was lost without her. For 55 years, they had been partners in everything. But he found comfort in the books they had shared and in the family they had created. He lived 2 more years, spending his days reading to his great-grandchildren and telling stories about their remarkable grandmother. When Quentin Ellis died in the spring of 1928 at the age of 77, he was found in his favorite chair with a book open on his lap. It was the collection of love sonnets he had read to Hannah on their 20th anniversary. And tucked into the pages was a letter he had written, his handwriting still neat despite his age. The letter was addressed to his children and read, "I was a drifting cowboy who could barely read when I met your mother. She gave me everything: literacy, love, purpose, and family. She taught me that education was not about being smart, but about being curious, that reading was not a solitary act, but a way of connecting with others. We read together every night for 55 years, and those hours were the best of my life. Keep this tradition alive. Read to your children and grandchildren. Share stories and love and knowledge. That is the legacy your mother and I want to leave. A family bound together by words and wonder, and the unshakable belief that love and learning can overcome any obstacle. We started with nothing but hope and Homer, and we built something beautiful. You are that beauty, all of you. Never forget where you came from and never stop reading. The Ellis children honored their father's request. The family tradition of nightly reading continued through generations. The ranch stayed in the family, and the library that Quentin and Hannah had built became a resource for the entire community. Eventually, it was donated to the town of Deadwood and became the Ellis Memorial Library, open to everyone. And in that library, in a place of honor, sits the original copy of Homer's Odyssey that Hannah Aldridge was reading the day she met Quentin Ellis. Beside it is a small plaque that reads, "They mocked her for reading books. The cowboy asked her to read to him every night." And together, they built a legacy of love and learning that changed countless lives. Quentin and Hannah Ellis, 1876–1928. May their story inspire readers for generations to come. People still visit the library to see the book and read the story of how a lonely woman and a humble cowboy fell in love over shared stories. Children learn about them in school, their romance held up as an example of how love grows when two people truly see and value each other. And on quiet evenings, librarians swear they can still hear the echo of Quentin's voice reading aloud, a testament to a love that transcended death and time. The Ellis family continues to thrive in South Dakota, generation after generation carrying forward the values Quentin and Hannah established. They are teachers and ranchers, writers and scholars, all bound together by the tradition of reading every night and the knowledge that their family was built on something rare and precious. A love that started with words on a page and grew into an empire of knowledge, kindness, and connection. In the end, those who mocked Hannah Aldridge for reading books were forgotten, their names lost to history. But Hannah and Quentin Ellis became immortal, their love story passed down through the ages as proof that being different is not a weakness, that education matters, and that true love can be found in the most unexpected places. All because a cowboy saw a woman reading and, instead of mocking her, asked if she would share that gift with him. And she said yes, beginning a journey that would span decades, touch countless lives, and prove that the greatest adventures are not found only in books, but in the love we build with others who share our passions and dreams. Their story ended not with death but with legacy, with the countless lives they touched and changed, with the tradition they established that would outlive them by generations. Quentin and Hannah Ellis proved that two people with nothing but love and determination could build something that would last forever. That words and stories have the power to connect us across time and space, and that the greatest romance is one where two people help each other become the best versions of themselves. They had started as strangers, a mocked woman with her books and a humble cowboy who wanted to learn. They ended as legends, proof that love, learning, and dedication can overcome any obstacle and create beauty that endures long after we are gone.